Welcome to the Dershow. In my letters, I'm always asked about things that are on my wall, pictures and signatures and paintings and memorabilia. And so every so often I like to do a show where I give my viewers and my listeners an inside view into my collection. I'm a collector. From the time I was a kid, I collected string and you know, you name it, I collected. I collected comic books, I collected bottle tops, I collected everything you can imagine, and I've continued to collect all my life. When I was a kid, of course, I had no money, so the only things I was able to collect were comic books that cost a dime. I wish I had held on to my early Superman and Captain Marvel comics, but my mother threw them all out, as she did my baseball card collection and my little autograph book. I had a little spiral notepad in which I got the autographs of baseball players, mostly Brooklyn Dodgers, because I went to high school 4 blocks away from Ebbets Field. I went to high school on President Street and Bedford Avenue, and Ebbets Field was on Bedford Avenue. And so I would go to the games and get autographs. Sometimes we would meet the players, like Carl Furillo, at the subway station, and we would walk with him to the stadium, and then he would sign our little books. We all had little spiral notebooks, and I had all the Dodger signatures in them. And my mother threw them out. Somebody once got me a shirt saying I used to be a millionaire, but then my mother threw out my baseball cards. So I like that shirt because that reflects. I'm not a millionaire when it comes to collecting sports memorabilia, but I have a really, really nice sports collection. And let's talk about that a little bit because it reflects the history of the United States. For example, the first thing I'm going to show you is a signed baseball signed by all the players who went to play in Japan in 1933. Remember, 33 is just 8 years before the bombing of Pearl Harbor and 7 years before, or 6 years before the beginning of the Second World War. But an American baseball team was assembled to go and play exhibition baseball in Japan. And somebody got them all to sign this baseball, which is really a piece of history. At the center is a beautiful autograph of Babe Ruth, a really, really nice or clean autograph of Babe Ruth. Right underneath the autograph of Babe Ruth is Lou Gehrig, again, one of the greatest ball players in history. And there are so many other terrific players. And that's not the reason I bought this ball. I bought this ball largely because of somebody's signature on the bottom of it who didn't deserve to be on this team, who was probably the worst player on this team. He was a catcher, wasn't even the starting catcher, backup catcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers, good fielder, good catcher, terrible hitter, couldn't hit a curveball, and, you know, batted in the low 200s. And why was he invited to join the Japanese tour on behalf of the United States, and why did he sign the ball? First, let me tell you who he is. His name was Moberg, a Jewish kid, I think from Brooklyn, who made it by hard work and determination onto the Brooklyn Dodger baseball team. He is not in the Hall of Fame or even close to it, although he deserves to be in the CIA's Hall of Fame. Why is he famous? Because the reason he was put on this baseball team was not his hitting prowess, certainly, and not even his catching prowess. He was a spy. He spoke, I think, 7 languages, including fluently spoke Japanese. And so he was put on the baseball team. He was also a photographer in order to photograph Japanese military installations. He pretended just to be a tourist with his camera and went around and he photographed everything. And he predicted the invasion of Pearl Harbor and how it would come and where it would come. And so I bought this ball, not because it has Babe Ruth's signature, but because it has Moberg's signature, because it tells us a bit of history relating to the beginning of the Second World War. That's my favorite baseball, and it's you know, quite a treasure. My second favorite baseball is the rookie year that Jackie Robinson broke in with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and this is a ball signed by all the Dodgers. So you have, Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, and at the time, of course, Jackie Robinson was the only African American on the team. Ultimately, many more would join. But this has Gil Hodges, but obviously the primary signature that I was interested in is Jackie Robinson's. The ball, is dark through age, but it's really a piece of history. Jackie Robinson's first year in the majors. In addition to Jackie Robinson's baseball the first year, I also have the ring that the Brooklyn Dodgers won in 1947, the year Jackie Robinson broke in. He won the Rookie of the Year, and the Dodgers won the National League pennant. And they were, of course, awarded a ring which says Brooklyn baseball team, Dodgers, Brooklyn, has a little diamond. The man who sold it to me says that it was Jackie Robinson's ring. Obviously, I have no proof of that. He gave me a story that would justify why it was his ring. Don't know whether there's any truth to it at all, and it's not that important because it doesn't have his name on it, but it does have the year he broke in. So it's really significant to me. Those are my earliest, some of my early memories of baseball in 1947. But I have a baseball which reminds me of the most negative memory I had, and this was during the High Holy Days of 1951. I had just been bar mitzvahed, and I was about to go off to the synagogue. It was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Brooklyn Dodgers had been 8 games ahead of the New York Giants in the 1951 season in August, and then the Giants caught up and the Dodgers fell apart, and the pennant, there were no playoffs in those days, the pennant was dependent on the last game of the season, and the Dodgers were ahead. And then Ralph Branca was called in from the bullpen. Ralph Branca was a great pitcher. By the way, we had always thought, and he was, a practicing Catholic. Branca, probably an Italian name. We learned later on in his career that his mother was Jewish and that he identified as partly Jewish and partly Italian. Irrelevant to this story. Bobby Thompson comes up to bat. 2 men on, and hits a 3-run homer, a walk-off homer, wins the pennant for the New York Giants, and that's when I first became an agnostic. I'm about to go to synagogue and pray, and this is what is happening? Dodgers losing the pennant. So this is a ball signed by Bobby Thompson and Ralph Branca to remind me of a terrible time. Then the Dodgers finally won a World Series. They had never won a World Series before. So they finally won a World Series in 1955. It was my first semester in college. I had been a terrible high school student, and so I swore that I would do well in college. I barely made it into college by the skin of my teeth. I was turned down on grades, but you could take a test in those days, an objective test, graded objectively, and I aced the test and made it into college, where I finished at the top of my class with all kind of honors and, some cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa and all that, having been, as my mother would say, summa cum sauris at high school, filled with difficulties. And I finished 40th out of a class of 50 in high school. 10 people behind me, not very many. But then I went off to college and decided to do well, but then the Dodgers won the pennant. And so I devoted all of my time to the World Series of 1955, which the Dodgers won. And this is the moment the Dodgers won, the World Series. And it has Johnny Podres, who was the pitcher, and Roy Campanella, who was the catcher, jumping on Johnny Podres and congratulating him. And it's signed by Duke Snider, Carl Furillo, Pee Wee Reese, I can't even read this name, Carl Erskine, who's still alive, the only remaining Dodger from that era who's still alive, Sandy Koufax, who grew up a block away from me in Borough Park, Don Newcomb. So this is one of my favorite pictures of joy and happiness. when the Brooklyn Dodgers finally won the World Series. And this, by the way, is an original Brooklyn Dodger pin, which I bought for 25 cents the year they won the National League Championship. It was the championship button. I couldn't afford a ring in those days. But when the Dodgers won the World Series in 1955, I was joyous. And then recently, when I was able to afford it, I was able to buy the 1955 World Series ring that was given to the Dodgers for winning their first and only World Series. This ring does have a name in it. It was owned by Don Zimmer, who was the second baseman, who was actually on the field in Game 7 when the Dodgers beat the Yankees. And this is the World Series ring that was given to the Dodgers. Today, when a team wins the World Series or wins the pennant, they make a lot of rings for, you know, everybody who works on the team, everybody who's associated with the team. Usually teams have multiple owners. But back in the day when the Dodgers won in 55 and won the pennant in 1947, usually there were only 30 or 40 rings made, 25 for the players, the coaches, that was it. But things are different now. And when the Boston Red Sox won the World Series in 2018, I was able to, the owners of the team allowed me to buy one of the World Series rings. So I own a World Series ring from the Boston Red Sox. It's an enormous ring. I find it hard to wear. When I go to Yankee Stadium sometimes to watch a game, I wear it just to show off with Yankee fans, because of course the Dodgers almost always and the Red Sox almost always played against the Yankees. They were the arch rivals. So I have rings from the Brooklyn Dodgers and rings from the Boston Red Sox, and these were really important to me. I'm also a basketball fan, and I found this ball to be quite intriguing. This is a baseball, not a basketball, but it's signed by the entire Boston Celtics baseball team, basketball team. It's signed by Red Auerbach. It's signed by Bill Russell, the greatest Celtic who ever played, maybe the greatest basketball player who ever played. Bill Sharman, who else? Tommy Heinsohn, the team. Bob Cousy, Havlicek. It's a great, for me, a great memento, having a baseball signed by my basketball heroes. At the time, this team was winning championships, I think 18 of them. Bill Russell, I think, has 11 championship rings. I know he has more rings than he has fingers. I was going to those games. I saw Russell and Cousy. I became friendly with Russell, Cousy, Havlicek, and some of the other players, Larry Bird. I was a very close friend of Red Auerbach, and so I would sit next to Red at the games, and all the players would, of course, come over. And then usually we'd have a dinner before the game. I'd bring him a pastrami sandwich from a local deli, and we would sit. And then after the game, we would have drinks, particularly if we won. If we lost, we didn't. But in those days, it was rare for the Boston Celtics to lose a home game. Things have changed quite a bit. There are no more Red Auerbachs, no more Bill Russells. But the Celtics are still a fun team to watch. I love sports. I love going to ball games. One more memento that you might be interested in. This is the signature of everybody who was involved in making the movie, The Babe Ruth Story, which was a great movie with William Bendix playing Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth actually appeared in a movie playing himself in a movie, the Lou Gehrig story. It was called Pride of the Yankees. As you probably know, Lou Gehrig died very young from Lou Gehrig's disease, from a neurological disorder. And they made a movie of his life, and Babe Ruth played himself. In this movie, he didn't play himself. but everybody who was in the movie, every director, every star, signed this memento, and Babe Ruth's signature is front and center on this. So, you know, one point I really have to make, it's a little bit political, but today you have to choose sides. Politically, you're either for Trump or against him, you're either Republican or Democrat, and if you're a Republican, everything the Democrats do is wrong, and if you're a Democrat, everything you do with the Republicans is wrong. That wasn't the case when we were fervent baseball and even basketball fans. When I was a fervent Brooklyn Dodger fan, but when Stan Musial came up to bat for the St. Louis Cardinals, I would stand up and give him a standing ovation because he was one of the great players of all time. When Joe DiMaggio came up to bat when the Yankees and the Dodgers played in the World Series, again, I wasn't at the games, but I was cheering him on as a player. Then when I was old enough and wealthy enough to go to games, I would root for the Red Sox, but I would cheer Jeter and Mariano Rivera and you know, the great New York Yankees. And when I went to Yankee games, there were Yankee fans who would stand up and cheer when some of the great Red Sox, Big Papi, would come up. I was at Big Papi's last game, and he got standing ovations from everybody, even people whose heart he broke the year that the Yankees were ahead 3-0, and Big Papi helped bring them out of a 3-0 loss, and won the. They won 8 games in a row. They won 4 games to overtake the Yankees, winning 4-3, and then they won the next 4 games in the World Series. Remarkable feat, remarkable accomplishment. So, sports tells us an enormous amount about character and about history, and so I'm proud to have a sports collection in addition to my collection of constitutional items. You may have noticed that I wear a strange tie. This is my cheating tie. If I'm ever arguing a case in the court and they ask me about the Constitution, I don't remember something, I can always just look it up on my tie. This is a tie that has the text of the Constitution of the United States on it. Obviously, I don't wear it for that reason. I wear it because I love the Constitution. I've devoted much of my life to defending the Constitution, and much of the criticism I've gotten over my life has been for my defense of the Constitution on behalf of unpopular people. So, you know, I believe in the adversary system of justice, and I believe in the adversary system of sports. I'm not a traditionalist. I like the changes that have been made to baseball recently. I like having a pitch clock. I like limiting the number of times that a pitcher can throw to a base where there's a runner. The one thing I don't like is I don't like the rule that doesn't allow shifts. I like shifts. I used to like when players were shifted because I would think that a good player could beat the shift every time. And, you know, when everybody was on the second base side, a good player should have been able to drop a bunt down the third base line, but that never happened. And so, you know, the shift worked and worked too well. It kept batting averages low, and since the shift has been abolished, batting averages have risen somewhat. I think more for righties than lefties, but there's big debates going on about that. But, you know, I taught a course at Harvard called The Law of Baseball. I taught it with the president of the Boston Red Sox, Larry Lucchino, who's a lawyer, who I first met when he was a lawyer, and then he became a baseball executive, a great baseball executive. And he and I taught a course together. And the last class always took place on Fenway Park and in the owner's box. And after we taught our last class, the students would watch the game, and often they would come home with a baseball signed or something like that. So you can imagine how many students signed up for that class. I was only able to take 15, but I think once we got like 800 students who signed up for 15 spaces, because, you know, it wasn't a graded course. I wasn't going to give students grades on their acuity in baseball law, but it was a course that people just loved. And, you know, we went into a lot of things relating to economic aspects of baseball, players' unions, And usually I would have people come to the house. We sometimes gave the seminar at the house, and players would come to the house, player representatives, and meet the students. And the students enjoyed meeting the players, but the players enjoyed meeting the students. And every year I was invited by the manager of the Red Sox to come to the dugout and where the players' locker room before the game, a couple hours before the game, and give them a seminar on law. And they would love it. And the smartest guy in the class invariably was Big Papi. Guy was absolutely brilliant. He knew everything. You know, I've concluded, I've represented a lot of athletes. I've known a lot of athletes. Obviously, you know, I represented Mike Tyson and O.J. Simpson, and I've represented others, some of whom I can't disclose the names of because their cases were successfully defended to the point where nobody has ever learned about them. But the one thing I learned meeting baseball players is that to be a great athlete, you have to be really, really, really smart. Hank Aaron taught me something. I may have mentioned this before, but it's worthy to mention again. He was at a dinner that my wife and I were at where honorary degrees were being granted by Harvard. And whoever organized the table sat my wife next to Hank Aaron. My wife is a baseball fan, but not like me. She knew who Hank Aaron was because she had gone to school in Atlanta, Emory University, but I was dying to be sitting next to him and my wonderful wife. After the first course, just quietly changed seats with me, and I ended up next to Hank Aaron. And the first question I asked him, I said, look, you're not the most athletic-looking guy in the world, and you're not, you know, the fastest runner and the sleekest player, but, you know, at that time he was the home run champion and an incredible home run hitter. I said, how do you do it? He said, Alan, do you remember when you were a kid, you used to play the game of odds and evens when you, you know, were who's going to go first in a baseball game or a basketball game? You go 1 size 3, shoot, 1 size 3, shoot. And you'd have to know whether or not the other person is going to put out a 1 or a 2. If you knew they were putting out a 1 and you had evens, you would put out a 1. If you knew that he was putting out a 2, you'd put out a 2. If you had odds, the exact opposite. And Hank Aaron told me, he said, I was the best player when it came to odds and evens of anybody because I could anticipate whether my opponent was going to put out 1 or a 2 because I had watched them choose and I saw that pattern and I could figure it out, and that was one of my talents. I said, well, what does it have to do with baseball? He says, it has everything to do with baseball. Because in baseball, it's between 1 and 2. Either your opponent, who's a pitcher, is going to do a 1, which is a fastball, or he's going to do a 2, which is a curveball. Now, today, you have all kinds of different variations of the curveball and even of the fastball, but back in the day, it was a 1 or a 2. And he said, I studied, even before there were films, I studied pitchers. I watched them during the game. I could see what their pattern is. Sometimes they threw 2 fastballs in a row. Sometimes they alternated. And I was really, really good at anticipating whether it was going to be a fastball or a curveball. And once you can anticipate it, you can knock it out of the ballpark. Of course, going back to Bobby Thompson, it is still alleged by Brooklyn Dodger fans. We're talking it's now, what, 72 years later? And it's still being argued whether or not Bobby Thompson stole the signs or was given the signs by somebody in the grandstands from the Giants organization that had binoculars and figured out a way of communicating what he saw, the 1 or the 2. Remember, in those days, catchers would just go 1 or 2. Today, catchers, you know, wear electronic devices in which they can directly communicate with the pitcher. So it's harder to steal signs, except maybe electronically, which so far hasn't happened yet. But there's still a debate about whether or not Bobby Thompson had the advantage of knowing whether or not Ralph Branco was going to throw a fastball or a curveball. We'll never know the answer to that question. And it was one of the great moments in sports history. The shot heard round the world. I'll never forget that day, 72 years ago. And I will never forget it. Sometimes, you know, sports images are just indelibly placed in your mind. You know, everybody remembers where they were when John F. Kennedy was killed. I certainly remember because I was a law clerk in the Supreme Court and was assigned to be the law clerk to tell the justices who were then in conference, secret conference. They always met secretly on Friday. Nobody was allowed in. I was the one who had to tell them that John Kennedy was shot. We didn't know he was dead. They came to my little office, watched on television, because I was the only person who had a television in the Supreme Court, because I was a sports fan, and it was only a month and a half after the World Series. I never take my television home. And so they came and watched, and I saw Walter Cronkite announce that John F. Kennedy had died, and Whizzer White cried, and some of the other justices were just distraught. And then the Chief Justice told all the justices to disperse and go to secret locations in case there was a Lincoln-like plot to assassinate other members of the government, left the law clerks behind to do that. So, you know, sports have played a very important role in my life, beyond just rooting. Many issues of sports, for me, have reflected periods of time in my life of importance. And so when I hold in my hand a Babe Ruth signed ball with Moe Berg, or a Jackie Robinson signed ball, or the Brooklyn Dodgers 1955 World Series ring, it just brings back incredible memories and incredible nostalgia. And as my wife likes to tell me, I live too much in the past. I am a nostalgia person. I love schmoozing with people about the past, and I love, ladies and gentlemen who watch my Dershow, I love schmoozing with you about my memorabilia, whether it be sports memorabilia or constitutional memorabilia. We'll do another show on these issues when it is warranted. See you soon.